Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Progress America Unfiltered. This is Rhett, back with Jocelyn and Tyler to talk about the loneliness epidemic. And so we started on this conversation last week, but this is something that really is just kind of an evergreen topic when it comes to the things that we like to talk about on this show. It ties in a lot of things, like the way that our society is kind of structured in a way that like feeds off of us feeling an inherent sense of loneliness or feeling a guilt that we need to reach out to people, whether or not it's a healthy relationship to maintain. All of that stuff that really just highlights the trials and tribulations of like what it means to be existing in the modern society. And so I really love this idea. I think it was Jocelyn who had this idea to really continue and dive deeper into the loneliness epidemic conversation. So if you haven't seen our first episode on this from last week, please go ahead and watch that and join us now to continue the conversation. Jocelyn, I'm going to pass it over to you first. What did you think was so important that we wanted to revisit this conversation today?
Well, last week, Tyler really brought up that, these social problems we're dealing with are all policy choices. And I agree with that so much. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of the things I read about this loneliness epidemic tend to have very individualized advice, like see your friends, smile more, be grateful. It's like, okay, great. Like I can do all those things. And I think I'm particularly critical of this advice because I'm already a very social and optimistic person. And I still feel this loneliness epidemic very viscerally because, again, to Tyler's point, we live in a country which prioritizes the individual and which prioritizes capital. So people's social lives, it's not just about seeing your friends more. It's about starting to create policy decisions which respect community, create community spaces, create time for community, and don't invest in making more highly paid, highly educated professionals who do all this complex knowledge work, but then don't see anybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is something that I say a lot as a joke to friends and in person and on this show, but we live in a society, right? Like, period, full stop. We live in a society. So we cannot blame individual choices and decisions on large scale societal problems without acknowledging the fact that we live in a society that has engineered these problems. And I think there's a lot of ways we can go with this. And one that I want to start with that we talked about before we started recording today is an article that I read. I finished reading last night. It's kind of long. It was by David Brooks in The Atlantic, and it's titled "The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake." My partner sent me this article to read, and I thought it was super interesting. It's about, the rise of the nuclear family, what social and societal conditions brought it up, and why we're seeing people move away from it now. And one of the key things that I took away from the article is that the nuclear family really did create a turning point when it came to isolationism and this feeling of hyper individuality. And, we turned from these larger tribes and groups to these hyper individualistic, I would even argue capitalist units that are only existing to take care of and purchase and protect itself. And even other family members who are further outside of that dynamic are excluded. So I'm interested to hear y'all's thoughts on the nuclear family and how growing up in the suburbs, growing up 50 feet from another house or, 100 feet, I don't know spatial distances from, your nearest neighbors, how that can impact your ability to connect with people and build community.
Well, I love that. I love that we're talking about this because it's aligning with this spiritual epiphany that I've been having lately, which is like, I know I said this on the show last time, so sorry for repeating myself, but in America, the social development is get educated, earn a certain amount of capital, get married, recede from public life. That's the thing. And like maybe you're allowed to have hobbies or like your girls' weekend or whatever. And like we don't have to live that way, I recently got married and like you get a lot of weird questions when you get married, like, oh, do you feel different? Like, was it the most magical culmination of everything you've ever done in your life? And like I couldn't figure out why this bothered me until I realized it really does put this priority on like me and like my husband as this individual lonely unit that does not match with my emotional reality. Like, I view my trajectory as like getting educated, developing my purpose, and then developing a lot of community and relationships with people who align with my purpose. One of whom is my husband, but like, he could die and I would still have a very meaningful life, which is like, like, it's not, maybe it's like kind of a macabre thing to say, but like, I really do think the nuclear family, personal romance, they're both just extensions of this hyper individualized view of emotional development. And that is how we get things like Donald Trump. That is how we get things like violent capitalism, because we really do believe in this individual greatness thing that we know is terrible for the planet. Sorry, Rhett, I was rambling a lot, but what do you think of that?
No, Jocelyn, I think you're absolutely right. Like in the nuclear family, like we think about that almost as a group dynamic, but within that, every single person has a role to play, right? Like in the prescribed one size fits all nuclear family, it's not so much about a community dynamic. It's like everybody has a role to play, and there's competition for those roles too. Like there's going to be one person that's like the quote unquote breadwinner or whatever, one person that's like the caregiver. There's always going to be those sorts of dynamics. And so they create competition not only within like individual family units, but also within like greater communities composed of those units too. Like, oh, you are better at playing X role than me, so I don't like you for that reason. And I think we all, and we talked to, somebody said, I think it was Jocelyn said Thanksgiving dinner when we were prepping for this show. And I think that like, we all see like Thanksgiving clapbacks, like hit TikTok or Instagram reels eventually. And with those two, I think that really highlights just like when people get into these situations, so often they are like, and like big group dynamics, so often it's like the culmination of conflict as well. So like, what does that say about us as well? That like when we're getting into these little situations, it's always going to be an area of conflict.
Right. And I also think, well, getting back into it, the policy side, which I love to deep dive into, like we're seeing the ways that policy upholds these structures, right? Like if we're going to talk about the nuclear family specifically, single family zoning laws and things like that, that require, certain land to be used to create single family homes as opposed to mixed use buildings or buildings that could hold multiple families or apartment buildings. So that's one thing that, a space that could fit 6 small families instead is given to one kind of big one or one, financially successful one. So that's like a real policy way that we're seeing. And like to tie it back locally to the DMV where I live, in Alexandria, Virginia, just right across the district, they just voted to change the single family zoning in like some major residential areas. But what's interesting is like everybody's freaking out, like, oh my God, this is going to ruin the neighborhood. Now there's going to be apartments everywhere and blah, blah, blah. But, it's not requiring that those buildings be used for, multifamily apartments. It's just allowing the possibility. But you see the pushback and you see how deeply entrenched this kind of thought process is. And we can get into transportation, walkable cities, so many things that impact in just the design of our towns and our cities and the states that we live in that impact the way that we commune with each other. I don't know, Jocelyn, do you have thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I love that. I didn't even think about that, Tyler, but the zoning for single family homes, like I have had a visceral hatred of the suburbs since I was a child. And I thought like maybe there's just something wrong with me. But the older I get, I'm like, yeah, this isn't really a joy creating space. Think about how much free time you would have to regularly fill these massive suburban homes with like parties or like book clubs or whatever. And as we discussed last show, that actually doesn't really make people happy. That's just another thing on the to-do list. Like I have to plan for book club. I have to host this party. It's like another thing. What we're supposed to do is have kind of effortless contact with each other, and definitely effortless contact with people who are different than us. And that's another thing with these, like, again, America has become so class rigid in the neighborhoods people live, in the places they live. And it's creating this sort of like social monotony that I don't think we're aware of because it's something that's just baked into our system. And we no longer have the democratic influence of just organically having people in your life that have very different experiences than you. One of my best friends is Vietnamese, and his parents came over after the war, and he was talking to me about this. He was like, yeah, immigration restrictions and immigration means like we don't have a little Baghdad the way we have a little Vietnam there. So we're not having like the benefit of refugee communities influencing people, which then impacts how they view foreign policy and then makes us more aware of how Americans stand in the world. I mean, like, these are like these subtle things that we don't think about, but they really do shape our national psyche in a major way. What do you think, Rhett? Is that is that too big a big picture?
No, I think you are totally like right on the money with this. And it just kind of like a lot of these policy decisions, Tyler mentioned transportation. I think about broadband, all of these things that like really do happen to help the things that we mentioned, like the loneliness epidemic, all of that at a very like comprehensive level in communities. These are policy decisions that can help us shape the future of how we view our relationship with one another. And so like looking into like these policy machines often run by people that are so powerful and have so much access to capital, wealth, all of that stuff, really just shows that like, maybe they are sowing these divisions intentionally. Like, I think there's a little bit of intention behind all of this stuff. Like, I don't think it's like necessarily overt, but like kind of what does it mean when we keep everybody too busy working several jobs to put food on the table? They don't have time to meet in community. They don't have time to organize at a larger scale. So maybe that's a little conspiracy vibe of me. I don't mean it in that way, but what I mean it more so as like when we're working so much, we don't have the time to exist in community, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of why I brought up, I think I heard this on a podcast and I wish I could remember which one. Sorry, if you know, put it in the comments. But I listened to a podcast this week that talked about, oh, you know what it was? It was called Overthink, which is a philosophy podcast that I love, highly recommend. And they did an episode on, this was specifically on like non-monogamy and polyamory, but they talked about the nuclear family as capitalist buying structure. And that is something so interesting that I think ties in with what you were saying, Rhett, where when you are the primary breadwinner or one of the two parents in a nuclear family household with multiple children, you are thinking like, how do I feed my family? How do I do this? How do we take care of our house? You don't have time to think about your neighbors and their struggles, or, the old man who lives down the street who might need help bringing his groceries in, or, the widower who needs someone to help mow her lawn. You are so hyper-focused on meeting your individual immediate family unit's needs that it keeps us from being able to see the larger picture where, maybe if you mowed her lawn once a month, the old widower would come over and watch your kids one night. So you could have like a night off. There are so many ways that we can live like symbiotically with each other and in community, but this hyper focus on these tiny individualistic households keep us from doing that. And it's I don't know, disappointing.
Well, and a lot of the, back to the capitalist brainwashing, a lot of the problems that we are brainwashed to solve with money used to be solved with community. Like, I think about this all the time with the childcare thing, Tyler. Like, everyone's like, childcare costs this much. If not, if you have friends and you guys can like trade, and then instead of this weird pseudo employee relationship, your kids have another mentor that's not you, which is really important. I mean, that has been incredibly psychologically important for me because I'm just not very similar to my parents in temperament. And like having other adults that can diversify that social development period, And like, humans, so I recently gave away all my possessions, and it really got me thinking about decision fatigue a lot, because at the end of every day I was like, I don't know, man, like whatever, just get it out of the fucking house. Like, sorry, get it out of the darn house. But I think about that with the way humans or Americans' social lives have been so harmed by this, is that at the end of the day, we've dealt with very complicated logistical structures for healthcare and childcare. we've dealt with very complicated jobs, we've dealt with overpaying for things. And then to have to plan an outing or a girls' weekend, or that's too much. That's like too much to put on yourself. And I think it then creates this resentment between friends that people don't really know how to talk about. Because it's like you're saying, Tyler, like it should be more like, hey, can I just mow your lawn? One thing that's really been damaging for me as an extrovert in this socially deprived time, and I didn't understand it until I married someone who was similar. It's like if you're very extroverted in a very lonely time, people are going to kind of like glom onto you. And then you're like, like I just wanted to like have a casual conversation with you, but people are very, very lonely. And then when you can't meet all their social needs, then they vilify you like, oh, she's so fake, she's so this. When the reality is nobody should be relying this much on individual relationships. There should be this like bigger, more porous, more easy social flow between communities. So we're not reliant on like our 3 friends and 1 romantic partner.
Yeah, I feel like my head is like going to break from nodding so much to what you just said. Like, absolutely, Jocelyn. Thank you for saying that. Like, that's definitely an experience that I've been feeling a lot recently. Like, as someone else who is pretty extroverted, just people really, trying to. I don't want to use the word monopolize time, but really just not understanding like the boundary setting. Like, and I think that's a really important thing. Is like, when we're in these times where people really want our attention and everybody's vying for attention in their own ways to meet their very real needs, it becomes super important to have clear boundaries that are existing within yourself, that you know how to exercise with other people. But then I think similarly with that as well, learning how to be okay with hearing boundaries from other people, and like also asking for like boundary setting as well, because I think that's a good part of friendship too, is okay, are you okay with this? Like very real conversations, I think, are almost missing. And it's also like boundaries are not existing to hurt feelings. They're existing to preserve ourselves and also preserve the integrity of our relationships. So Jocelyn, thank you so much for articulating that, because yeah, I've been thinking about that. Tyler?
I also think something that gets lost, something that I've been thinking about too, is the nature of our friendships. I think something that gets lost when we are so isolated, that we think that every friendship has to be super deep. We hang out all the time. We're attached at the hip. Like, back when we used to go to the office, you had acquaintances. You had people that like you'd see in the hall and you'd just say hi and how's your day? Oh, that's nice. How are your kids? Like, you maybe know a little about them, but you don't feel the need to, you have multiple spheres and multiple circles of closeness, and people were allowed to just be in certain bubbles, and you don't feel like you have to be everybody's best friend, or because that is exhausting. You can't be everything for everyone. I think we all know that. And so I think that's also a downside, is because people are so lonely, we have such outsized expectations on the relationships we do have. And this idea that like we have to be able to get into a 5-hour deep dive about our trauma over coffee, or, I have to be available every time you call me. And like, there's a time and a place for that. And there are absolutely people you should be able to have those relationships with. Should it be like 8 people that you have these types of like hyper intense relationships with? Maybe not, but like, you like it, I love it. But it's this idea that I think in some capacity, even lost the ability to just be casual with people and exist in a space that is friendly and welcoming and comforting without feeling the need to cement the friendship or make it extremely serious. And that's a loss when we don't have, like we talked about last episode, these third places, these casual, unplanned happenstance occurrences where you get to connect with people. So yeah, that made me think about that a lot. And I've been thinking about that in my personal life of like, do I need to be a therapist friend for all of my friends? Or can I just reserve that for like my partner and like a couple of my truly closest friends that I'm able to understand and give advice? I can't give advice to everyone, you guys. And vice versa.
Because it's like you're saying, Tyler, like because we've lost the consciousness around community. Like, okay, you know how I learned this, Rhett? You're gonna love this. Barry's boot camp. So Connor and I are the most out of shape, chubby people at Barry's boot camp, but we love it. Like, we love going because it's like you're exercising with like a bunch of really like wonderful, upbeat trainers and people. And like, we like got like, you know, casually friendly with all of them. Like, we're not gonna like probably go to their weddings, but like we would talk about it. We're like, wow, this is a really lovely start to my day every morning, to go in, have casual conversations with people that both parties know are never going to evolve into like, let's go on a trip. You know what I mean? Like, it's so nice to just have that like wonderful, casual, normal, like, and we need that as humans because that is how we used to live. We used to have these tribal realities where like with like 100 people that like we all had each other's back. That didn't mean we had to have these like intense, like almost pseudo romantic friendships of like, yeah, let's say everything to each other. And it is just so important for our mental health to, like you're saying, Tyler, have casual friends.
Jocelyn, you are so right. Barry's boot camp is so great for that. Like, viewers at home, Jocelyn and I always have our conversation about how she has her Barry's boot camp, I have my Soul Cycle, and we are just happy with that. And it is just so great too, because yes, that is almost like another third space where you can make friends, enjoy each other's company, but it doesn't have to be so deep. I also love the silence in those spaces too, because like you have an activity to do, so you don't need to be chatting on the treadmill or chatting on a bike. Love it, love it, love it. So you two, I want to ask, are there any final thoughts on this topic? I think that this is something that we will be revisiting very soon, and I would absolutely love that. But I want to ask, just on the policy standpoint or anything on the nuclear family, is there anything you two want to close out on? Tyler, I'll hand it to you first.
Yeah, I would say if these 2 episodes have taught me anything, it's that no matter what somebody who is, profiting off of an article tries to tell you, there's no one individual cause for why Gen Z feels so lonely and isolated right now, right? We can point to a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, like I say about everything, it is a policy choice. And we do know the policy choices that we can do to try to combat these things, and creating more green spaces, more community gardens, less single family zoning, more public transportation, more pedestrian only zones, more walkable cities. These are the things that we need to see and we need to be advocating for, you guessed it, at the local level if we want to see it. Truthfully, and we say this all the time, stop worrying about the macro level of like, how do we help every Gen Z person in America feel less lonely? It starts in your community. Do you know your neighbors? Do you know that girl who like walks to the bus every morning? Like, start there. Start in your neighborhood, on your block, in your building, and then build up. And that's how we will start to see things trickle down over time.
Yeah. And, I also like, if when it comes to our own personal healing, to like think in terms of, okay, this problem that I would normally solve with money, how can I maybe find someone that has like a mutual interest to me, and that like we can make a trade somehow? Like when I was giving all my stuff away, Connor and I decided not to sell things just because it was like, come on, man, we're gonna like spend a month doing this to get like a few $100. It's not worth it. And what I found was posting our stuff on the Buy Nothing group was actually like a very uplifting community experience, because people would come and like take our couch or take our desk or whatever, and it's like it felt really good to be giving my couch that I've loved to someone else who now gets to use it. And like, our lives are riddled with things that we would typically face alone, or again, maybe solve with money. But I would encourage all of us to start thinking of ways like, how could I maybe solve this childcare problem by offering a trade to a friend? How could I like maybe help this elderly person in my apartment if they watch my cat, because these casual friendships are kind of built on a beautiful sort of self-interest, right? Like we both benefit from it, which is what removes that weird intensity of like, let's form a crazy bond right now. It's like, but that beautiful self-interest is what makes us feel sane and connected and not alone in the world.
Jocelyn, Tyler, thank you both so much for this conversation. I really cannot wait for us to revisit this topic very, very soon. And viewers at home, please let us know what you thought as well in the comments. I think that's one thing that we can do to kind of feel like we're coming together as a little Progress America Unfiltered community, is to let us know what you thought in the comments, as cheesy as it is. But thank you all so much for watching. Make sure that you like and share this video as well, and make sure that you subscribe. We are so grateful for you for tuning into this conversation. Have a great one, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye.